I taught the same book out loud to my third grade class every September for 41 years. One chapter a day, first thing in the morning, before anything else. 820 times in 41 years. My husband Frank went to his grave in January of 2006, believing our son Michael would one day be a writer because of it. Michael is a corporate lawyer in Boston. He has never written anything longer than a brief. But a boy named Tommy Greer, who sat in the front row in September of 1987, he became a writer. 12 novels. And when his first book came out in 2009, he put my name in it. I bought the book at the shop on Main Street on a Thursday afternoon. I read the dedication standing in the parking lot in the cold. I drove home. I sat at this table. I picked up the phone to call Frank. And then I remembered Frank had been dead for 3 years. I put the phone down. I have not told anyone that story until right now. My name is Dorothy. Everyone calls me Dot. I am 83 years old, and I taught third grade at Garland Street Elementary in Bangor, Maine, for 41 years. I started in September of 1964. I retired in June of 2005. In between, I had roughly 900 students, one husband, one son, and one book I read out loud every single year without exception. The book was about a boy and a dog and what it means to love something you cannot keep. I chose it my first year because it was the book that made me want to be a teacher. I kept choosing it because every September, at least one child in the room would go very still during a certain chapter near the end. Just still, not crying, still. And that stillness, I could not give that up. That was why I kept coming back. Frank understood that. Frank was a quiet man, an accountant, patient in the way that only truly confident people are patient. He never competed with the classroom. He used to sit at this same table every evening and read to Michael when Michael was small. He had this idea. Frank had a lot of ideas about Michael. That Michael would grow up to love books the way I loved books. That Michael would maybe write one someday. Frank said it the way men of his generation said things they wanted badly. Not as a wish, as a certainty. Michael is going to be a writer, not might be, going to be. Michael is 57 years old. He reads contracts. He is very good at it. I want to be careful here because I love my son completely. Michael is a good man and a good father, and he built his own life the right way. But Frank's idea about Michael, I watched that idea outlive its usefulness by about 40 years. It was still alive in Frank when he died. I heard it in the way Frank talked about Michael's job, always with a slight pause before the word lawyer, as if he was still adjusting. And I never said anything, because what was I going to say? In September of 1987, I had a boy named Tommy Greer in my class. Front row, first seat. Small, quiet, with the kind of eyes that were already paying attention before you said anything. Most 8-year-olds you have to find a way in. With Tommy, I had the feeling from the first week that he had already found a way into me, that he was watching and filing things away. He never caused trouble. He never said much. But when I read aloud, when I got to the chapter near the end, the one I knew, I watched Tommy Greer go very still. Not crying, still, the way the best ones do. In November, I lent him my personal copy to take home over the weekend. My own copy. The one I had carried since 1961, with my name written inside the front cover in my mother's handwriting. Dorothy Ann Glenbrook, Christmas, 1961. I told him to bring it back Monday. He brought it back Monday. I put it on my desk. In June, when school ended, I was clearing out, and I realized the copy on my desk was a library copy. Tommy had returned the wrong one. He had kept mine. I thought about calling his mother. I thought about it for about 3 days, and then I thought, He is 8 years old and he kept a book. Let him keep it. I never called. I never asked for it back. Frank died on the 14th of January, 2006. Heart failure, 5 in the morning. He was 71. We had 38 years. The last 4 were the best ones. I had retired. The house was quiet. We were finally just sitting together in the evenings without me grading papers or Frank running numbers. We had 4 years of that. I would give a great deal for 4 more. At the funeral, Michael stood next to me the whole time the way a good son does. He held my arm during the burial. And afterward, back at the house, he sat at this table with a cup of coffee and he said, I remember this exactly. He said, Dad always wanted me to write something. I think I always let him down about that. He said it quietly, the way you say things you have been carrying for a long time. And I said, No, Michael, you never let him down. I meant it as comfort, but I said it so fast it came out as dismissal, like the subject was closed. Michael nodded and drank his coffee, and we talked about something else. I have thought about that moment many times since. In November of 2009, I was in the bookshop on Main Street on a Thursday afternoon. New releases table near the front. A novel, The Tide Comes In. Author, Tommy Greer. I picked it up because of the name. I told myself it was probably not him. Common enough name. I opened to the dedication page. It said, For Mrs. Callahan, who put the right story in the right hands at exactly the right moment. I still have your copy. I bought the book. I walked to my car. I stood in the parking lot in November in Maine, and I read that line 4 times. Then I drove home and sat at this table and picked up the phone to call Frank. 3 years gone, and I still reached for the phone. I put it down. I made a cup of tea, and I thought about who to tell. I did not tell Michael. I want to explain that, not excuse it, explain it. If I told Michael, I would have to explain who Tommy Greer was. If I explained who Tommy was, I would have to explain the book. If I explained the book, I would have to tell my son that for 41 years I had watched child after child fall into that story the way Frank had always hoped Michael would fall into it. And I would have to sit across from him and watch him understand that the thing his father wanted for him had happened, just not to him. I was not willing to do that to Michael. I told myself I was protecting him. I put the book on the shelf in the back room. I did not speak of it. That was 2009. In October of 2017, I do not know exactly what changed, maybe turning 80, maybe 8 years of sitting with it, I wrote Tommy Greer a letter, paper and envelope. I found his publisher's address. I wrote 2 pages. I told him I remembered September of 1987. I told him I was glad I had not called his mother about the book. And then I told him about Frank. I told him that Frank had always wanted his son to be a writer, and that his son had become a lawyer, and that Frank had gone to his grave with that particular hope still folded up inside him. I do not know why I told Tommy about Frank. I had not told anyone about Frank that way in 11 years. I mailed it. 2 weeks later, Tommy wrote back. He said he still had my copy. He said it was on his desk when he wrote. He said my mother's handwriting, Dorothy Ann Glenbrook, Christmas 1961, was the first thing he saw every morning when he sat down. He said he was sorry about Frank. He said he would like to do something if I would allow it. I wrote back and said he did not need to do anything. In 2019, Tommy published his 6th novel. I did not know about it until a copy arrived at my door in March with no note inside. I opened to the dedication page. It said, For Frank Callahan, a man I never met, whose wife taught me that some stories are meant to outlive their tellers. I sat at this table for a long time after that. A man who had been an 8-year-old boy in my classroom for 9 months in 1987 had given Frank something I had not managed to give him in 38 years of marriage. The knowledge that what he believed in had mattered. The knowledge that the dream did not die with him. It just traveled to a different boy. I still did not call Michael. I am telling you this so you understand the particular shape of what I did. It was not cruelty. I have never been cruel in my life. It was something quieter and more stubborn than cruelty. It was deciding for other people what they can and cannot carry, and then carrying it alone, and calling that love. Michael found the book in March of 2023. Logan Airport in Boston, delayed flight, bookshop near his gate. He said the name caught him first, Thomas A. Greer. He thought he had heard it somewhere. He opened it, read the dedication. He called me from the gate. He said, "Mom, who is Frank Callahan to Tommy Greer?" Not a question. He already knew it was his father. He just needed me to explain how. I told him everything. Tommy in the front row, the book, my copy, the parking lot in November 2009, the letter I wrote in October 2017, the copy that arrived with no note in March of 2019, all of it. I talked for a long time and Michael did not say anything until I was finished. And then he said, "Mom, you wrote to a stranger about Dad." And then he said, "You never wrote to me." He was not angry. I want to be clear about that. He was not angry. But there was something in his voice, a kind of quiet, bewildered sadness that I recognized immediately, because I had put it there. I had been putting it there for 57 years without understanding what I was doing. Michael flew up 2 weeks later. He stayed 4 days. We talked about Frank in a way we had never talked about Frank. We called Tommy Greer together from this table Michael dialed, and the three of us talked for an hour and a half. Michael cried at one point. He did not apologize for it. That was new. I have this composition notebook. I have been writing in it since January of 2006. 47 letters to Frank. Things I wanted to tell him. Things that happened that he missed. Things I should have said when he was alive. I have never shown it to anyone. Last month I showed it to Michael. He sat in that chair and he read every letter. When he was done, he closed the notebook and put his hand on top of it and sat quietly for a while. Then he said, "He would have loved knowing about Tommy." And I said, "I know." And that was enough. Here is the only thing I want to leave you with. There is someone in your life right now holding a version of you that is not quite the real one. Not because you lied to them, because you decided, quietly, carefully, with the very best intentions, what they were allowed to know. You have been managing what they carry so they would not have to carry too much, and you have called that protection. And it is not protection. It is distance dressed up as kindness. The people who love you do not need the handled version. They need the actual one. The one that picked up the phone and remembered too late. The one that wrote 47 letters it never sent. The one that stood in a parking lot in November and had no one to call. Let someone in. Not because it is easy, because they have been waiting, some of them for decades, for you to stop managing and just tell them the truth. Tommy still has my book. My mother's handwriting is still on the first page. I think that is exactly where it belongs. That is all I have got.